Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have a very special night ahead. We have 3 guests with us tonight. We have Dr. Leslie Laud, and we've had Leslie on before. Dr. Leslie Laud supports teachers, schools, districts, and states nationally with strengthening writing instruction. She has taught in both general and special education and worked as a principal. She holds a doctorate from Columbia University, where she was mentored by Dr. Judith Birch in explicit reading instruction, Dr. Lynn Corno in self-regulated learning, and Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond in school change. She has served as co-PI and lead PI, principal investigator, on federally funded large research studies of writing instruction, publishes empirical studies in peer-reviewed journals, and presents frequently at national conferences. We also have Nate the Great Joseph, Nathaniel Hansford. And as you know, we also had Nate on with us. He's a no BS bestie also. And Nathaniel Hansford has taught every grade from pre-K to 12 in many interesting and diverse locations, from South Korea to subarctic of Quebec. He specializes in using meta-analysis research to help teachers implement proven methodologies. And he has recently come out with this wonderful book.
You got your copy before me?
I got my copy.
I haven't got my copy.
The Scientific Principles of Teaching, Bridging the Divide Between Educational Practice and Research. And we also have the retired superintendent of Cumberland School District, where Dr. Leslie Laud's research was done on thinkSRSD. And for those of you who don't know what that stands for, it is self-regulated strategy development. And her company is a professional development company that helps teachers to be able to use SRSD effectively. And we are here tonight because Nate did a study along with Elizabeth Rienstra. Am I saying that right, Nate?
Right, yes.
Elizabeth cannot be here with us tonight, but a study was done on the training, the thinkSRSD training, and we're very excited to talk about that with you. So we're going to start off with Leslie. So Leslie, you and I have been in contact about this for a long time, and I know you are super excited because a lot of times you are questioned about, do we know if this training is effective? And, it's very nice to feel that it is effective. We think something's effective, but now you know it's effective. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you enlisted Nate to help you with this research? You're muted. You're muted.
Sure. So this goes all the way back about 18 years, what I ended up bringing to Nate. I found this approach, actually Pooja Patel, my colleague, found this approach and she used it, and she had her children who were on IEPs were coming off of IEPs. She had this little girl who learned this approach who was very shy and had a pretty serious learning disability. She used this approach with her, and then the child ended up being asked by the teacher to read a piece of writing that she had done out in the setting with Pooja in front of the entire class. And this child had never been featured for anything before like this. the mother came in tears, you put my child in front of the class and she read, I'm so proud of her. That's never happened. So we knew that there was something special about it. I began using it. I saw my kids take off in a way that I had no mindset for because I hadn't understood that this could actually happen, that kids could become self-regulating. So I just kind of watched it and thought, well, this looks good. And then I began sharing it with other teachers and seeing the same thing happen with their kids. And then I brought it to a school when I ended up moving out of state to a new state, husband job transfer. And I worked with a school nearby me and I saw the same thing happening. And I saw teachers of 35 years saying, I've never seen this before. I've never seen kids become so self-regulating. This year, I finally have a word for it of magic pixie dust. Like after a couple, about 10 weeks of this kind of instruction, the kids take over and then they're in charge and they're leading the whole brigade. And it is unlike anything. I don't know. I didn't know how to describe it for so many years, but now I'm getting so many stories and it happens to every single teacher who uses it. And it's kind of like they get addicted to it and you can never turn back once you see kids reach this level of independence. So I began seeing that. And the first year we used it, whole school in Worcester, Massachusetts, this is the first school in Nate's chart, we saw these incredible gains. And the school had always had a lot of zeros and no fours on constructed response. Suddenly they had fours and they had no zeros. And their whole state assessment went up 5%. So I made a chart and I showed that to the schools next year. And then those schools made gains. So I added it to the chart. And then like, holy Moses, every year I kept adding the schools. And then it became like an expected thing. Every year in September, the scores would come out, they'd get added to the chart. And we had no failures, like no school left behind, like any school that was jumping on and doing this. So about 5 years ago, Dr. Karen Harris said, you ought to find somebody who will do a cohort analysis, look back, take all your data from your schools and publish it. And so I began looking. I reached out serendipitously to an evaluation organization. It ended up turning into an $11 million grant so that we could study further schools, but they didn't end up doing the cohort analysis. Then I heard about Nate. Rebecca Miles introduced me to Nate. And we met a couple of times, spoke, emailed, and I thought, this guy seems to really know what he's doing. And I, carefully vetted you, Nate. I read all your studies and everything, and then asked Nate if he would do this task of taking completely publicly posted ELA outcome data from and then I challenged him. I said, you find one school that's not on my list that claims to have worked with me. You can check the web, the dark web, everywhere you want, but everybody's there. There's no hidden data. So I went to Nate and asked him to look at all of the schools, including Mr. Robert Mitchell's schools.
So, Nate, the study is entitled thinkSRSD, a secondary analysis cohort investigation. And I guess Elizabeth assisted you with this. Could you talk a little bit about your agreement with Leslie and what were your findings?
Yeah, I want to say that Leslie was a part of the study. So we worked with Leslie. We didn't necessarily just work for her. We put an agreement in place. And this is something that anytime someone asks me to support them with a research project, I've been asking them if they would sign an ethics agreement with me. And it's just because I think oftentimes research really ends up being marketing. And I don't actually have an interest in doing marketing for people. A common practice in education studies, unfortunately, when it's sponsored, is that the research team will replicate the study over and over again until they find something positive, and then they'll publish the positive results and they won't publish the rest of the results, or they'll do things like do multiple assessments and then only publish the assessments that show positive outcomes. So I have no real interest in that. That's I feel like it's bad science. I feel like it's unethical. So I said I would be happy to work with Dr. Leslie on the condition that she signs an agreement saying that whatever we find, we published. And she was more than happy to do so, which was great.
So this is very interesting because, I think that, you know, as far as getting paid to do this type of research, people could roll their eyes and say, oh, well, of course he was paid to do this. But I think it was very brave of both of you to have an agreement like this, because Leslie was basically saying, whatever, Nate, you find, it's going to be public. You were going to make this public regardless of whatever the findings were. And, you know, and for Nate, I know that you are so careful about your reputation. So I just think this is just incredible that both of you put yourselves out there. It says right up front in the study, Nate, that this was the agreement, and that Leslie had a sign on the dotted line that she would go along with this no matter what the findings were. So, Dr. Robert Mitchell, you were the superintendent at the time of this study. From what I read, there were 8 schools. 4 were given the PD, 4 were in the control group. Is that correct?
So that was our randomized control trial that we ran 2 years ago. And those schools actually participated because of Cumberland. So Cumberland had been before that. Cumberland had begun about 10 years ago, and every single year made a 3 to 4 point gain. Mr. Mitchell can speak to that, but I want to finish up on the RCT. The RCT, the randomized control trial, is, I think, the most exciting part of all of this research. So 8 schools were in a cluster, and they were randomly thrown into a popcorn machine, 4 put in the control and 4 put in the treatment. And the 4 that got the treatment made a 3.5% gain on average on the state assessment. Some schools made 17, some grade levels made 30, but on average, 3.5. 3 is what's considered outside the standard error of measurement. So 3 is considered statistically significant. So they made significant gains. The control only grew 1.5, which is not statistically significant. It is much lower. And 2 of those went down, whereas all of the schools using this went up. And that is the most pure measure, because you can't say, well, the schools that wanted it did it. This was completely random. But over to Mr. Mitchell, he can tell his story about what happened with where he ranked in Rhode Island and how that changed when he began using this.
Would you like me to share our story with thinkSRSD? Well, I first learned about thinkSRSD when I was an assistant superintendent, and at that time in Cumberland, our students weren't performing particularly well on the state assessment, especially the high poverty schools. And just to give you a little overview of the Cumberland School District, there are 5 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 1 rather large high school for the state of Rhode Island. And the schools that weren't performing particularly well were the Title I schools, the high poverty schools. And as the assistant superintendent, you know, it was my responsibility to do something about that. So, we did a tremendous amount of research. We needed to find something that was evidence-based to improve the performance of our kids. We actually we sent a team of professional staff to Worcester that, you know, and they had already implemented thinkSRSD and had tremendous success. So, based on what we learned, based on our extensive research, we knew that we had to do this. So for us, we actually started in our lowest performing elementary school, which happened to be a high poverty school as well. And because of the tremendous gains that those students were able to do over the course of a couple of years, all of the other elementary schools said, hey, we want to be a part of this. Then the 2 middle schools said, hey, we want to be a part of this. And we went from the middle of the pack in our performance on the state assessment, the RICAS, you know, there were like 30 plus districts in the state of Rhode Island. We were in the middle of on our performance, and we became a top 5 performing district. And if you were to ask anyone in our district, anyone would tell you that the reason that we did as well as we did was because of thinkSRSD. And here's what I think is really important. And whenever I get a chance to talk about this, I think it's really important because everyone agrees with this, that teacher preparation programs don't do a particularly good job of teaching teachers how to teach writing. This teaches teachers how to teach writing. And this isn't, and I say this all the time too, this isn't about test scores. Test scores are important. I mean, that's, you know, how we're assessed. That's how we're compared to other districts. But the beauty of this is we're teaching kids metacognition skills. We're teaching them life skills. I don't want to be overly dramatic here, but I believe thinkSRSD and the way that we implemented it in our district literally changed the lives, especially of our high poverty students. So I can't say enough about it. There is no question that our students performed better because our teachers performed better, right? So in order for our kids to get better in school, we need to get better at teaching them. And that's exactly what thinkSRSD did for us. And I could go on and on. I really believe that I actually believe all schools in America should be teaching children how to write this way. Not only, and what was interesting about this process that we went through with thinkSRSD, not only did our ELA scores improve dramatically, but our math scores went up as well. There is literacy in every content area, right? So and interestingly enough, some of the schools that we visited, they shared the same thing, that their math scores went up as well. So it was a wonderful experience for us. I'm glad we did it. You know, it happened at the end of my career. You know, I was an administrator for 27 years, and I'm still doing some interim work every now and then. And there's no doubt in my mind that thinkSRSD had the single biggest impact on student performance of any initiative that we ever were exposed to during all my years of teaching and all my years of being an administrator.
Well, that was high praise. Wow. And it's really authentic. We actually brought you on like 5 minutes before we were about to record. So that wasn't rehearsed. Obviously, that was heartfelt, and that's really wonderful to hear. So I want to bring my co-host, my beautiful co-host, Judy Boxner, into the conversation. Judy, you've been listening to Nate, Leslie, Robert Mitchell talk about thinkSRSD. What are your thoughts? Any questions? Anything after you read the study or listening to this conversation so far?
So first, I want to give myself kudos. I read another study, Faith. I read another study. I got up in the morning. I did my homework. 22 pages later, I survived. I made it. It was very well written. It was easy to read. And it was so, and I want to go back to what Faith said right in the beginning about Leslie and Nate being so transparent. Leslie, I think that's freaking amazing. You put yourself out there. That's so scary. Like, that's so scary. The results didn't have to look this way. They could have looked very different. How would you have dealt with that, Leslie? Would you be like freaked out?
It's terrifying. Nobody understands when you're going through a research study. There are these evaluators and researchers, and I'm the one in the Petri dish, and it's terrifying and it's nerve-wracking. Thank you for acknowledging that, because nobody has until now, Judy.
Maybe you wouldn't have gotten the results. I mean, you must have been somewhat confident because you know it is such a wonderful program that you've seen in action for many, many years. So you really must have believed in it so much to the point that you wanted to see that concrete data. You didn't go in.
Anybody who uses it is absolutely transformational. It is like Mr. Mitchell said, that it is that that self-regulation kicks in and everything shifts and the
I think
kids are
that's
in
awesome.
charge. Their
And I think
self-talk
that's awesome.
changes.
And Nate, as I continue to get you to know you better, and it's amazing, Nate, I've never met you in person, but I feel like you're a friend now and somebody that I deeply respect. I just
Ditto.
really value when you break things down for people like me that are still in the field, you know, still teaching, still coaching. And you know, trust is very hard, right? The code of trust has been broken in education for a very long time. We were led to believe that certain things were research and evidence based, but they didn't have a lot of research and evidence behind them. So right now, you know, it's like buyer beware, be very cautious. We don't want to make, as educators, the same mistakes. And, you know, I appreciate how transparent you are. Like every detail is like, Nate is like explaining, this is what happened. This is, you know, this is how it all went down. So that's a level of trust that I think is so appealing to somebody like me. And I think, you know, this whole experience of the literacy view has made me so much more aware. Before it was like I would see a book would come out on the market and I'd be like, oh my God, this is the new hot book on the market. I got to read this. And I would just assume that everything was research and evidence based. And some of the stuff that I use now doesn't have a lot of research and evidence behind it, but I know it's still good and I still do some of those things. However, I think it's so important to shift our attention on what is showing strong gains. And I definitely have more questions about those gains. I know that you guys mentioned 3%. I think I saw 7% somewhere in that article. I'm not a math person, so you're going to have to break those pieces down for me. But that's great. But I'm wondering, if it is so strong, how can we still anticipate, if schools keep doing this and get better about their delivery and their content knowledge and so forth, can we get even better results in the future? And then also, Robert, that gives me a lot of hope, what you're saying, because I do work in some of the poorest districts in New York City. I work in District 9 in the South Bronx, and I adore my students. I have confidence in my students, but the pillar of writing has been a pillar that has not been given the attention that it deserves. And I feel a lot of teachers are extremely frustrated. Schools are rolling out new reading curriculums and programs, and some writing programs are stronger than others, and teachers are just like really struggling. And I think that, you know, the fact that you got good results in a district that was struggling gives me a lot of hope. And I know, Leslie, you're so kind. You're always on social media. You put all your resources out there. I'm using your resources. I used your resources today, right before hopping on this Zoom call. I was working with a student, and it's like magic. It's like magic. It's like magic. Those checklists that you provide, giving kids that structure that they need is just, it's just so powerful. But I guess my big question is, how do we get even better results? I wanted to see even higher numbers. I saw that there were gains, but you know, when you see 3, 7, how do we get it to like 50%, 40%? Is it going to get higher? Is there a chance?
Can I clarify the 3? So
Yeah.
the 3.5, that half is important to me. 3.5 was the gains that so we had 97 schools over a 10-year period. 8 of them were part of a randomized control trial study where I did not randomize them. An external evaluator randomized them. And
Can you explain that,
Sure. Randomized. I guess it's just a spreadsheet, because I kept asking the evaluators, but how do you do it? Do you like put it on dominoes, throw it in, and then reach in? Like, how do you do the randomization of the schools? Do you take the 8 names?
Leslie, I'm going to jump in for a second. So basically, Judy, when you talk about random, think of random.
I know. I know what random means, but
I know, but the teachers don't. What I'm trying to bring out is they don't know. They're not aware. They don't know which group they're going to be in. That's the point. So when a study is done like this, it's just someone else is just going to group them into a control group or the treatment group, and they don't know that which group they're in. That's powerful. At least they shouldn't know. There are some studies where they do know, and we know some of those studies.
I want to know more about that, Faith.
It's not necessarily nefarious if they don't know. It's just better if they don't. I'm just going to throw that out there. Because I think sometimes it's just easier in the sense that, like, you know, you might have a school district where a teacher's trying out a new product or pedagogy, and then the company asks them, hey, can we do a study in your classroom? I'm sure that's a lot of studies out there that have been published.
Can I just respond to something that Judy said about the gains too? Like, we had huge gains. Like, I don't have the data in front of me, but like mind, I don't want to be overly dramatic here, but mind-boggling gains. And it's just like, you can't write well unless you comprehend well. And built into this process is, students have to learn to really understand explicitly what they're expected to do. And I just think that everything that they're taught is, organizationally, everything that they're taught is just so beneficial. It's impressive. And you know what, there's one other thing that I want to share with you. I don't have to do it right now. And it's not just the mechanics of writing. They're also taught positive self-talk. Have you heard about this? Positive self-talk. Can I give you an example? If you don't mind, I'll do it right now. Can I just, because it was incredibly powerful to me. So I spent a lot of time in classrooms, especially the elementary classrooms, and when we were implementing this, I wanted to see, I didn't, unannounced, stepped into the back of classrooms to see how this was being implemented. And I was in the lowest performing elementary school, B.F. Norton Elementary School in Cumberland. And I went into the back of the room, and I was with the reading specialist who played a key role in the implementation process, a superstar educator. And I was in the back of the room. Kids did not see me. They did not know that I was there. And the teacher was doing a thinkSRSD lesson. And she asked them to complete a task, and you could tell that they were struggling. There was silence in the room. And I don't know, based on your experience, teachers don't do particularly well with silence, but the teacher was providing a significant amount of wait time. And it was clear that whatever the teacher had asked them to do, they were struggling with this. Then all of a sudden, this little African-American boy raises his hand, and the teacher called on him. He got up out of his seat, and he said to the whole class, remember, everyone, it's better to try and fail than to never try at all. Now, I heard that. That was probably 10 years ago. I will never forget that. I looked to the reading specialist that was standing next to me, and I said, what was that? And she said, that's positive self-talk. I'll never forget it. It was probably 10 years ago, and I remember like it was yesterday. So that is built into the process too. So I like to share that because it touched my heart. And it's not just the mechanics of writing that they're taught other things as well. And it's a pretty amazing thing.
So Leslie, you were talking about explaining the numbers. And I don't know if you finished, because we got off on the whole randomized control. So could you explain the numbers?
Sure. So out of the 97 schools, 2 years ago, there were 8 that were in this randomized control trials research study for control for treatment. And the control who did not receive thinkSRSD made a 1.5% gain on the state assessment. But the group that was part of the study made a 3.5. One of the schools made 17%, the lowest achieving. and the 3 is significant. So they definitely met significance, and the control did not. So we have hard evidence here that this is leading to significantly different outcomes for kids. Then Judy, you asked, how do we keep going? So that was just for that little mini study within the 90, out of the 97, the average gain is 7%. So if you take this on and you're at 40% or 50%, you're going to shoot up to 57. And if you stay with it, it goes higher and higher every year. Now, how do you get it to go higher and higher is what Judy was saying. And a very wise man, Dr. Charles Haynes, had sat me down once early in my career and said to me, because I was so excited about this, and we were just sitting on a bench, and he said to me very calmly, "Do you really think one thing can do it all, Leslie?" And I just sat there quietly, and he was quiet. And it was this big watershed moment of like, well, of course not. You know, we all need each other. Or this is a village. It takes a village to help. And so there are other books out there. There are speakers like Dr. Mitchell Brookins, who rocked my world last week with how to get them to think critically, students to think critically before they write so that the writing will be higher. There's Dr. Charles Haynes's book, From Talking to Writing, which is magnificent. Karen Harris has fabulous books out that have really helped me that we have to read. There are books coming out. There's Joan Sedita's The Writing Rope that gives you a lay of the land. So there are multiple books that we want to be reading and going to PDs and learning from each other. Your colleagues are your best. You have fun colleagues, Judy. They're your best resource for your PD, and Faith Burkowski coming to your school helps as well. But it's always going to be a collective effort, and we need to organize schools as much around teacher learning as we do around student learning. That was my dissertation advisor, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, who said that. So Judy,
quick question. I had a quick, thanks for that, Leslie. Robert, so what did training look like in your district? What did it look like? Was it like 5 PDs, 10 PDs? Was it in-class coaching? What did the training for the teachers look like? How did that roll out?
I would say that, you know, that the biggest challenge as a superintendent, as an assistant superintendent and then superintendent, was organizationally, how did we find the time to provide the professional development? And and I don't know about this where you are, but substitutes were a real challenge. But we pulled staff by grade level. So we got all the 3rd grade teachers together and provided professional development to them. And then we did that, with each grade level. I think, at least from my perspective as the superintendent, I would say that was the biggest challenge, finding the time to train the teachers to implement this. And you know what, we welcomed the input of teachers in helping us to figure out how to, find the time to do this. And once they got turned on to it, they wanted it. And just one other thing, I mean, these are the kinds of things I think about. And there was more collaboration between teachers at grade level. And then there was more collaboration between teachers in each of our different schools. So it was really interesting how the impact that this had on professional development. I would say that that's the biggest thing. And one of the things that I am able to talk about as a superintendent, I mean, I'm in a position where, I can say, we're going to focus our attention on this. We are experiencing initiative overload. We're going to focus on the things that we know work. And we knew this worked because it was evidence-based. And so, as the superintendent, I was able to make the decision that we were going to focus our attention on this, because I think I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that if you focus on just a few things, that the potential for doing them really well is probably more likely than if you're trying to do 10 things well. So we just really focused on that. And again, I don't know that I answered your question, but I think that's the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge for us at the time was finding the time, but we did it. We figured it out.
Can I cheers button focusing on a couple of small things instead of a lot of things?
Nate needs a cheer button.
Here we go.
Yeah.
I would agree with Nate. That was very powerful, Robert. Believe it or not, what seems common sense to you is not always common sense, right? That I think that there's so much out there, but just making that decision to focus on one thing and doing it well is a smart decision. So thank you for saying that. I think that was very important. Nate, when I look at the study in here, it says that regarding specific populations, these practices have been found especially effective with students with disabilities, as well as for African American boys and those on free and reduced lunch. And, you know, I know that you quoted this from other studies, but what makes you think, like, why would these particular groups benefit the most from something like thinkSRSD?
I have a very simple answer. I have no idea. Actually, I have not ever used SRSD myself. So my role in this project was just trying to really critically evaluate SRSD. And Dr. Leslie helped write the literature review where you're pulling that from. So that wasn't from our research project. That was from other people's studies that have been done on SRSD. So I'm sure that she can speak to that far better than I can, but I really can't answer that question.
Leslie, could you maybe share some ideas about why these particular groups would have, you know, benefited from this?
Yes, if you can hold up Nate's book, The Scientific Principles of Instruction, of Teaching, I would say that they're in that book. And Nate captures them in that book, and that book will guide you. Nate, true or false, we have to explicitly teach. It can be quick, it can be efficient, but we need to explicitly teach the tools, the scaffolds, the key understandings. We need to front load, explicitly teach them. Then we need to model and practice for long enough that they actually get proficient. Karen Harris sometimes says, don't pee in the classroom, post, explain, and then just move on. She says you have to be sure that you post, explain, and then model, practice, practice, practice. You have to be sure that you have that whole piece there. So Nate, number one,
you know, I'm going to have to put what Leslie just said in a Instagram post, and that was like,
don't pee in the classroom. You've got to put Dr. Karen Harris right under it. We were a little taken aback. You know, the scholarly woman was telling the teachers, don't.
I'm going to have to re-listen to this like 12 times.
This was it. It's don't post, explain, and expect. It's good, right? It's really good. But Nate, number one, teach. Number two, model. And then number three, have a scoring feedback system. Wouldn't you say that that would be the core principles from your book, that those are tried and true across all domains?
I wouldn't phrase it in exactly that way, but it definitely fits in the model that I suggest of that we need to be giving students explicit instruction, that we need to be monitoring that instruction or that progress of the students, and that our instructions should be matching our assessment goals. So I would definitely agree with what you're saying.
So, Nate, you couldn't answer my other question, but maybe this one you could. Have you done a study like this for any other writing framework? Is this your first one that you've done, or have you done others? And how does it compare to other ones if you have, in fact, researched others?
This is the first time I did anything writing based. I've done a couple of retroactive case studies like this, and you can call it whatever you like. You can call it a cohort design. You can call it a case study. But this was a really large example of this. And I think, what we really did is we compared the percentage of students at grade level the year before Dr. Leslie's SRSD was implemented with the year after on state assessments. And then I think the nice thing about that is it's all publicly available data.
Yeah.
We have everything was 100% sourced from Google research of looking at state websites saying what percentage of students were at grade level this year on this assessment for students. And then the other nice thing is because we didn't have any constraints of working with actual humans ourselves, we're just retroactively looking at this data. We got to have an enormous sample. So we had, at the end of our analysis, we had included 97 schools. There were other schools that Dr. Leslie had worked with, but we didn't use them either because they didn't complete the full training or because they had a change in assessment. So the first year was one assessment and they rewrote the assessment and created a new one for the following year.
Faith, I had a quick question.
Yeah, I was just going to bring you in. Go ahead.
I wonder if it's the same question. Now I want to know your question too. All right, tell me if it's the same one. So did most of these schools have evidence-based reading programs? And did you notice differences in schools that had certain programs or curriculums? And were there balanced literacy schools as well?
There was the whole array.
So I'm sure Dr. Leslie. Yeah.
Faith, was that the question you were going to ask?
And that's.
Sorry.
I would say that this is kind of we're talking about the difference between a random effect and a fixed effect. When we do any kind of really large analysis like this, we don't know what's going to happen in those individual schools. So we're not controlling for those factors. We're just hoping that throughout the large enough sample size that we sort of correct for that through that sort of sample. And I would think that because the sample was so large, we estimate at least 19,000 students would have had to have been a part of this. And because this is all standardized assessments and because the effect was really consistent, that there's something there. Obviously, personally, I would love to see follow-up research on this. That's large scale RCTs. We didn't do that ourselves. But every single school that we included in our analysis showed a positive result. And I think the likelihood of 97 schools showing a positive result after implementing SRSD seems kind of unlikely if it wasn't doing something. So I don't know exactly. This isn't the type of study that can be used to isolate the exact effect of SRSD, but I would be very surprised if there was not a positive benefit after seeing 97 schools show positive outcomes.
So here's what I'm wondering. I think clearly the training is crucial. And I think that, when we talk about a program, often it's just dumped into a school or a district. And, teachers are not really given the support that they need. I know Robert said before that teachers really were not taught how to teach writing. And so how can we ensure that the training is consistent and that it's something that will go throughout the year and there's sustainability? What are your suggestions for that?
So we need to have the internal superstars. Like Robert Mitchell had shared, he had a phenomenal coach. When we have that, we see stronger gains. But I want to just step back to the fact that what we're bringing in matters because we didn't bring in a boxed curriculum. We brought in a pedagogy and it worked across all different curricula. I don't care if you have HMH or Wonders or CKLA, it was working across all of them. and they were all going up, and we had dramatic gains, and we have CKLA data that is absolutely incredible. So it's not like it was working better with the knowledge or working better with the non-branded knowledge. I mean, they're all teaching knowledge. So it was whatever you were using, this was just strengthening it and making it better. But it does matter what you bring in. I think we've broken the sound barrier in terms of getting pedagogy so distilled and so simple and so easy to package and give to teachers now. I'm working with some implementation science experts who are with deep expertise in human-centered design for pedagogy and bringing these strategies to teachers in the lightest lift, highest yield way. And last year, I heard from, we'll get the data soon, but a coach in Wisconsin who took 5 faculty. Well, first she tried it out in the classroom with 2 or 3 teachers. Then she took 5 faculty meetings, 1 hour each. And there was another coach in New York who did the same. She said that on the day of the state assessments, most of the children were using Pow Tide, putting self-talk all over their planners. They'd gotten there. They got them to the magic implementation. This was 5 hours. The other teacher told me the same. And when I came into her faculty meeting one afternoon in the spring, they were teared up and showing me their kids' writing. We've gotten it down to 5 hours, how we bring it in. Now, that's not the end of the story. As Judy said, you have to keep going. You have to keep learning and deepening. But we can make a critical change within that amount of time now.
Faith, can I respond to your question? Because I think it is probably the most important question of all. Because if schools implement thinkSRSD, if they do it, they're going to see improved performance of their students. They're going to see improved performance of their staff. So to me, the critical piece here is leadership. You know what? People ask, well, what did you do? I'll tell you what we did. We did it. And I made it crystal clear that we were going to, because I knew that if we implemented SRSD the way that we needed to, that we were going to see the same kind of gains that Worcester did and the other districts that implemented thinkSRSD. It is making the commitment and not backing off at all. It's going to take some time. And once leadership makes the commitment and holds everyone accountable to implementing what they've learned, they're going to see gains. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. They just have to, leadership has to make the commitment. That's it.
Can I give a cheers to Robert Mitchell? Because
he said it. Robert
would walk into my meetings at the beginning of the day and say to all the teachers there, very friendly, warm, hello, good morning. He was very well liked. We're doing this.
Good.
And there was no shaking. There was no nothing. It was just, we're doing this. And he was in the classrooms, a quiet force and a loud force in the meetings and with the principals and everybody. This is happening.
Wonderful. And you know what? That's so important. I was just talking to my colleague, I was driving, and it does have to come from the top. And when it comes from somebody at the superintendent level, that's amazing. Think about how many schools you could, impact in a positive way. And, and I encourage principals. It has to come from the top also. Your coaches could believe it. A couple of teachers could believe it. But I think implementation goes so much better when a leader says, this is happening. It's a non-negotiable. We're all in this together and it's going to happen. Not like one person says, oh yeah, we'll do this. No. And I just wish that happened more often. I find that so often people will say something and then the follow through is not there. Or people forget. You can't forget what you prioritize. And I think that, Robert, you prioritizing writing is so important. It is completely a neglected pillar of instruction. And all the evidence says that reading and writing are so intrinsically connected. And it pisses me off when I work with so many kids privately after work and they could read so well. And then I ask them to write a sentence and they can't do it. And I wonder why. It's because the schools didn't prioritize it. They didn't teach it together. And that is really crippling kids. And then I've heard, parents tell me, oh, the school decided that they're just going to switch to assistive technology. And you know what? Yes, many kids do need that help. I'm going to say that because Faith and I took a little heat on one episode. And yes, I know a lot of kids in the special ed community or kids with IEPs, there is value to those kind of tools. However, I strongly and passionately believe that kids should still be taught to learn how to write. We cannot just jump straight to that tool without giving kids the opportunity and practice. We need to believe in those kids. Now, does that mean they can't have any assistive technology? No. But we can still, especially when they're young, especially when they're in 2nd and 3rd grade, do not give up on those kids. Do not. And that's what I feel like schools sometimes do. They give up.
So I have to just say, I've been fortunate enough to work with a school district where there is powerful leadership, and it makes such a difference. It really doesn't matter what you're implementing. When you have the right leaders in place who are getting the training, they get the training. They could recognize and walk into classrooms and know what it's supposed to look like and care enough to make it work. Then you have the right recipe. You need to start from the top. That's for sure. What I wanted to bring up, last point that I wanted to bring up, was what Leslie said about it doesn't matter what was in place. Having the model, the framework of SRSD, the writing piece put in with any reading program that was already there, even if it's a program that doesn't get high marks in terms of evidence-based from what we're looking at, it still made a difference. There were still improvements. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening now in terms of school districts getting in programs based on the promise that content will be the answer. Not to say that there won't be strategy instruction, but it seems like there is this one or the other idea, not the idea that this has to really be the priority to get the right strategies, the right self-talk in place, and then try to get really strong, complex text in children's hands. So could we just talk a little bit about what's happening now and what are some suggestions for teachers, leaders out there in terms of looking at this?
We need the complex text. I think Tim Shanahan and a couple others have looked at the research and done the research that that is clear. We absolutely need complex, challenging text in the hands of kids grade level. It's an equity issue. It's incredibly important. That is different from knowledge building. Knowledge building, we have no evidence that building knowledge within kids' heads is going to make a difference. Complex text, yes. Now, will knowledge hurt? No, of course not. Let's do knowledge. But we have to do the full reading rope. We have to teach the full reading rope, and we have to hit all of those strands. Knowledge is a thing, but not the thing. And my worry is that our nation has gone into this whole thing. I saw it today in meetings where people are saying, oh, and now I've got knowledge building. Now I know what to do. That's not going to be the solution. That is a part of the strand. Let's do it. But there are even stronger other levers: teaching inferencing, teaching text structure, which is the core of thinkSRSD. So there are all those other strands in the rope that all come together. Remember that little word, strategic readers, at the side of the rope. So all of those things are working together to build strategic
Nate, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that, and I'm actually going to disagree with Dr. Laud a little here for a second, respectfully. I don't think it's that there's no research to suggest that knowledge building impacts outcomes. I think it's just that some of that research, I think, has been exaggerated. In the sense, specifically, we know that knowledge building is really important for students comprehending specific texts. So if you want kids to understand a text about volcanoes, the fastest way to improve their understanding of that is to teach about volcanoes. So we know that knowledge is important. It's just that it's hard to create a transfer effect. Dr. Sonia Cabell did do a meta-analysis that showed statistically significant transfer effect on knowledge building, but there's been several meta-analyses on that topic, and hers is the only to show a significant effect, although hers is the most recent and large scale to be peer reviewed. So I think realistically, I think I agree with Dr. Laud, though, that we don't have to make this an either or. There's probably a value to knowledge building. I don't know exactly how great that value is. I don't know if it's the most important thing. I would argue it's probably not, but we don't have to make it an either or. We can say, hey, we need to build knowledge, and we need to also teach things like strategy. And there's obviously other pedagogies that matter too. I would just point to Dr. Graham's meta-analysis on writing instruction for a quick second. Or no, not Dr. Graham, sorry, Dr. Filderman's meta-analysis on reading comprehension, sorry. They showed that when we used knowledge building texts, that the average impact on reading comprehension was higher than we used narrative text. So it does also seem to mean that there is a benefit to not teaching more nonfiction than narrative. But again, too, I don't think anyone would want to argue for no narrative. So I think a lot of this argument has to just come down to balance and the importance of teaching a holistic approach, which is a strange way of putting it, since I think I've been a pretty strong critic of balanced literacy. But I think that's the understanding of that term and how it's been applied that's the problem, not actually the concept of a balanced approach that is problematic.
Robert, do you have anything to add about knowledge building? Was that a priority for you?
I don't know that I would certainly have anything to add after these two experts shared their opinion. I guess the thing that was more meaningful to me, not only as an instructional leader, but also, based on my own experience, was really learning how to organize my thinking, and understanding that there is a process to writing. And thank God I had a teacher that taught me that. So I'm more focused on those kinds of things. And again, I think we had our curriculum was, I think was important, but I'm a strong believer that, the tools that we give students to learn, the process of learning, the mechanics of learning is critically important as well. Maybe more important.
Thank you. Thank you. Judy, any last thoughts that you have before we wrap up? Judy, you're muted.
I guess from a practical standpoint, like, okay, say I'm in a school, which I am, but say there's a teacher watching this right now, or an administrator watching it right now, or a superintendent watching it right now. They're interested in SRSD. What do they do next? And I had some people that actually texted me. They knew I was going to see Leslie today. Some of my own teachers, we have seen, the videos. We watched it on election day together as a cohort, and they want to dig deeper. So what do we do? What do we do tomorrow? We want more SRSD, or we just want to start SRSD, or we want to learn more about SRSD.
There is a distinction between the research world, SRSD, and thinkSRSD. And what thinkSRSD is, we've worked for 2 decades to translate that to practice in schools. So we are different in that way. We've had to adapt it. We've had to pare it down. There are parts that are very strong and robust in the research studies, but we couldn't get the schools to take those up and think in that way and then continue to get gains and hold on to it. It didn't sustain. So we had to adapt it by augmenting it with the work of Dr. Charles Haynes, and now the implementation science work that I'm doing around human-centered design and what are the most critical elements and what can be paired off. The fit and fidelity tension, what do we need to keep the core of it, but what can we put aside or teach later? So that is what thinkSRSD specializes in. And we have a website, we have free stuff. We have a YouTube channel, thinkSRSD YouTube. We have a Facebook group, so you can join us in any of those places.
Yeah, and I see Leslie answering those questions all the time. You're so nice to your fan base, Leslie. You know, so can people from your team like come to schools? Do you send out like a network
we
of
do.
people?
We're going to Brooklyn. We're working in more New York City. We want to get to yours, Judy, just so I can see you.
Yeah, we need to get you right in.
Yeah. But we're seeing schools take off on their own more independently now. We work with their coaches.
Can take off independently.
Absolutely.
What does that mean?
The Wisconsin story. The Wisconsin story, where the coach learned this with a couple of teachers and didn't even involve me, and then rolled it out in 5 faculty meetings. And the New York coach, Devorah Sasson, did the same and ended up getting it to take hold school wide. So if you have a really special coach, somebody like Judy,
I have work to do. I still have work to do.
But yeah, our coaches take it on. But yeah, we go to schools. We run a national network, which is really fun. We get together once a month with the coaches and we put them all into breakouts and they talk to each other about their problems and their successes. And then we have principals guide them, coaches guide them, and we meet once a month. In addition to that, we have the e-learning, and then yes, we do go to schools.
So you're building sustainability by like this, almost like a train the trainer model.
Yes, absolutely. Train the trainer and then continue your learning. Go to Keys to Literacy and take their foundational course. Go to Dr. Mitchell Brookins and learn from him. Pick up some of the great books on teaching, writing. But you'll continue to learn. We get you started.
I'd love to add something on that because that's new information to me. As I said earlier, I'm not actually SRSD trained. So actually,
not yet, Nate. You don't know.
Well, maybe I need to go get trained. But as part of this project, I almost wanted to keep my distance from SRSD because I just wanted to independently evaluate it for Dr. Laud here. But what she's saying to me makes a lot of sense in terms of results. I almost wonder if part of what she's seeing is in terms of her success is to do with that collective self-efficacy of these coaches coming together and problem solving and sharing, and not just SRSD itself. Because I think just that model, that PLC model, for lack of a better term, is a really valuable thing in itself.
I agree, because I studied under Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond in school change. And that was my whole dissertation, doctoral studies. And then Pooja had studied literacy deeply. And when the two of us came together and I had the know-how for how to bring this into schools and adapt it and make it take hold through structures, like what you're talking about, Nate, through the PLC structures, the two coming together seem to work really well with the supporting of the schools.
Leslie, can I ask you one more weird question? And then Faith, I'll be done for real. So you sent me a book a while back and I'm kind of obsessed with it. It's in my garage. But like, how come I don't see your book? Like, what if more people just want to buy Leslie's thinkSRSD resources in a book?
Such a good question, Judy. So somebody said to me recently, a lovely mentor said, you're really at a crossroads. You should hire a CEO and market this. And I'm not ready. My baby's not ready. I want to keep researching it. So we're going to stay like a little thing that runs research studies, and people who find out about us come to us and work with us, but it's not ready. It's not ready to give birth to. I need about 3 more years or maybe a little longer.
All right. So now we have it on the record. Leslie is giving birth in 3 years, guys.
Leslie, I didn't even know you had a book.
Well, I think maybe, I think, Judy, were you also asking how come you don't sell the book separately? Is that what you were also asking?
Yeah, like teachers like books and manuals and guides and
surprise announcement. Okay, I have a
What?
surprise announcement. So the big surprise announcement that we were supposed to do tonight is that Nate has released this study, and you can all get it, and we've submitted it for peer review at Journal of Educational Research. And you're getting it first right here on the Literacy View, breaking news, that this study is out. We have a DOI. Nate has it up in preprint, and it is with a peer-reviewed journal and should hopefully be out within 3 months. But the other surprise is that a publishing company, I don't know if I can say the name, but a publishing company that I really love that does great research has invited me to do a book. And that's what I've been spending half my day on for the past month. And I'm meeting with my editor tomorrow, and that will hopefully be out in the fall.
That's exciting.
Okay.
That's wonderful. Well, congratulations. And I think, this was so great bringing all of you together. Someone who did the study, the person who runs the professional development, and then a school leader. Certainly was a great conversation. Thank you so much for spending your time with us tonight talking about thinkSRSD. I know that I was fortunate enough to be able to sit in on some of this, and it was very exciting, all good stuff. And what I love about you, Leslie, is you don't rule out other writing, books. You encourage it. You encourage people to go outside of what you do to just keep learning. So thank you so much. Judy, do you want to wrap up?
All right, I'm going to do it as fast as I can. Go to our website, theliteracyview.com. Everything's there. We've also added a new feature, a donate button. So if you love what we're doing, donate. Faith and I pay a lot for Buzzsprout and uploading our videos and all of that good stuff. And we don't want to be sponsored by a publishing company. So if we want to stay true and authentic, help us out. Also, follow us on YouTube, The Literacy View. Follow us on Facebook. Join our group. It's growing. We want to hit 4,000. Like, we're almost there, but we're not there yet. So after this episode, we hope to be there. The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. Where else are we, Faith? Instagram, The Literacy View. Faith is at High Five Literacy. Everybody, we're out there. You know where we are. And the biggest thing that you could do for us is share our episodes. Tell another teacher. Tell another principal. Tell another parent. And we love you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.